You are 28 years old, and you are very good at making things disappear. Not people, not evidence, money. Specifically, other people's money. Money that arrived in the world through violence and fear and the specific human misery of addiction, and that needs, by the time you are finished with it, to look exactly like the proceeds of a successful restaurant chain or a property development company or a consulting firm that technically exists and technically does nothing. You are the last step between a cartel's earnings and a cartel's lifestyle. You are the reason a man who has never filed a tax return in his life can own a hotel. You did not plan this. That is the thing about this life that people never understand when they imagine it from the outside. They imagine a recruitment, someone in a back room, an offer, a choice with clear stakes on both sides. What actually happened was quieter and more gradual and more ordinary than that. And by the time you understood fully what you were doing, you had been doing it for 2 years. And the money had become the architecture of your life, and the architecture was very difficult to leave. You studied finance at a good university, not the best, good. You were precise, methodical, the kind of student who understood systems rather than memorized them. You graduated into a legitimate private banking firm and spent 3 years learning how international wealth management actually worked, how money moved across borders, how shell companies were structured, how the gap between what tax law said and what sophisticated clients actually did was managed by people with the right licenses and the right silence. You were good at the work. You were also, slowly, becoming aware that the most interesting money, the money with the most complex problems attached to it, was not the money your firm officially handled. The first introduction came through a colleague, not a criminal, a lawyer, a man who worked in international corporate structuring and who had, over several years, built a client base that required a specific kind of financial precision that most licensed practitioners were either unable or unwilling to provide. He did not explain this to you directly. He described a client with a complex cross-border asset management problem. He mentioned the fee. The fee was 4 times your monthly salary for a single transaction. You said you would think about it. You thought about it for 3 days. You said yes. The transaction was clean, technically sophisticated, but not illegal in the jurisdiction where it was executed. You told yourself this for approximately 6 months, during which time you completed 4 more transactions for the same client referral network, each slightly larger than the last, each slightly further from the technical legality of the first. By the time you understood who the money actually belonged to, not the shell company names, not the holding structures, but the actual human beings at the origin of the cash, you had already been paid enough that stopping felt like a choice with consequences on both sides. You made the calculation. You continued. This is how it starts. Not with a gun, not with a threat, with a fee, and then another fee, and then a life built around fees that you cannot explain to anyone. 3 years later, you have 4 clients. You do not know their real names. You know their structures, the legal entities, the holding companies, the nominee directors, the jurisdictions they prefer. You know their preferences, how quickly they need money moved, how many layers they consider sufficient, which financial institutions in which countries ask the fewest questions. You know enough about their operations to understand that 2 of your 4 clients are competing organizations, which means you are serving both sides of a market whose disputes are not resolved in court. You have decided not to think about this very often. You are good at deciding not to think about things. Your world operates on 3 principles. You did not invent them. You learned them. The way you learned everything, by understanding the system structurally. The first principle is placement. This is the stage you do not personally handle. This is where dirty cash physically enters the financial system for the first time. The moment of maximum exposure. The point where most amateurs get caught. Your clients have their own people for this. Currency exchange booths in cities that nobody watches closely. Small retail businesses with high cash volumes. Restaurants, car washes, nail salons that report slightly more revenue than they actually generate, the difference being the injection point. This stage is not your problem. By the time money reaches you, it has already passed through enough hands that it carries the surface legitimacy of a business transaction. The second principle is layering. This is your work. This is your art form, if that word can be used here without irony, and you have decided it can. Layering is the process of moving money through so many transactions across so many jurisdictions, through so many legal entities, that tracing it back to its origin becomes practically impossible. Not just difficult, practically impossible, which is a different standard and a much higher one. You use shell companies, dozens of them, sometimes hundreds across a single client structure. A shell company is simply a legal entity that exists on paper and conducts no real business. It receives payments, makes payments, holds assets on paper, and creates one more layer of distance between the money's origin and its destination. You set them up in the British Virgin Islands, in Panama, in Delaware, in Luxembourg, in Singapore, in Dubai, places with strong privacy laws, low oversight, and governments whose cooperation with foreign investigators is slow, conditional, and expensive to obtain. Each shell company owns another shell company, which owns another. The money moves between them through invoices, consulting fees, licensing agreements, management service contracts, intercompany loans that are structured never to be repaid. On paper, everything looks like normal international business activity between related entities. This is exactly the point. The third principle is integration. This is where the money comes home. By the time it reaches integration, it has passed through enough legitimate-looking transactions that it can re-enter the economy without suspicion. Your clients buy real estate, luxury apartments, hotels, commercial property, in cities where prices are high enough that large transactions are unremarkable. They buy businesses. They invest in legitimate companies through legitimate investment vehicles whose ultimate beneficial owner is buried so many layers deep that finding it requires simultaneous regulatory cooperation across 6 jurisdictions, which has never once happened in the time you have been doing this work. The money becomes a hotel in Dubai, a restaurant chain in Madrid, a property portfolio in London. These are not just investments. They are the final proof of concept. A man whose money you have cleaned can now point to a legitimate business empire and say, there is where my wealth comes from. And anyone who wants to challenge that claim faces years of legal work in multiple countries, all of which costs money, all of which produces documents that lead to other documents, that lead to jurisdictions that do not cooperate, that lead eventually to nothing. You have made $300 million disappear this year. The word disappear is not quite right. Transformed is better. You have transformed $300 million this year. You are 31 years old. The mechanics are one thing. The life is another. You live alone. The apartment is minimal, clean surfaces, no family photographs, nothing personal visible from anywhere someone could observe. This is not pathology. It is risk management. Anyone who enters this apartment, invited or not, should learn nothing about you from the objects in it. Your phone is encrypted. Your laptop runs through a VPN whose location changes every 48 hours. Your financial records are clean because your fees are routed through a legitimate consulting structure that pays tax in a jurisdiction with a favorable rate and no obligation to share information with your country of residence. You are, on every document that exists, a modestly successful independent financial consultant. The gap between what the documents say and what is true is the gap you live in. You have lived in it for 5 years. You have become so accustomed to it that ordinary life where people say true things to each other, where work is explicable, where a colleague might ask how your week has been, and receive an honest answer, has started to feel like a language you used to speak and no longer quite remember how to form sentences in. The loneliness is structural, not personal. You are not by nature a cold person. You have dinner with people. You have conversations that are warm and specific and human. What you cannot do is have a conversation that goes deep enough to require you to explain yourself. Every friendship exists at precisely the depth where you have not yet had to lie about something important. You manage these friendships with the same precision you manage financial structures, keeping them at the distance where they provide connection without creating exposure. You are good at this. You do not feel good about being good at it. There are rules. You set them yourself when you were starting out, before you understood fully what you were starting, and you have maintained them with a discipline that has cost you things you do not name. You do not handle money that is directly traceable to a specific act of violence. This is a rule that sounds clean, but is, in practice, a technical distinction rather than a moral one, because money does not carry the history of how it was earned, and the structures you build do not distinguish between revenue streams. But the rule exists, and you maintain it because it is the last boundary between who you are and who you will not become. And you understand that boundaries only exist if they are maintained, and that the moment you cross one for a good reason is the moment they all start moving. You do not meet clients in person. You communicate through intermediaries, through encrypted channels, through lawyers who represent entities that represent clients who are never named. You have one direct contact, one person in the chain between you and the actual organizations you serve. Her name, the name she gives you, is Elena. You have spoken on the phone perhaps 40 times in 3 years. You have never met her. You know from the precision of her instructions and the speed of her responses that she is extremely good at her job, and you know from the nature of her job that she knows enough about the structure of your operations to be catastrophically dangerous to you if anything went wrong between you. You are both aware of this. It creates a specific kind of professional relationship, highly functional, deeply careful, built entirely on the mutual understanding that neither of you can afford the other as an enemy. Year 5. The call that changes the structure of everything. Elena contacts you through a channel she has not used before. The use of a new channel is itself a signal. It means this conversation does not exist in the usual record. She describes a new client. The amount is larger than anything you have previously handled, not incrementally larger, categorically larger. A single operation moving assets at a scale that would require you to build an entirely new structure from the ground up with new entities, new jurisdictions, new banking relationships. The fee is proportional. The fee is the kind of number that makes every calculation you have run about your future. When to stop, how much is enough, what the exit looks like. Recalibrate simultaneously. You ask for 72 hours to consider it. Elena gives you 48. You spend those 48 hours doing what you always do with a problem of this scale, mapping every point of exposure. The new client means new connections, which means new people who know parts of the structure, which means new points at which the structure can fail. The size of the operation means regulatory attention at a level that smaller operations avoid. There are transaction thresholds above which certain financial institutions are required to file reports, regardless of how legitimate the paperwork looks. You build the risk model. You identify the weakest points. You build contingencies for each. You run the probability calculation, the likelihood of any part of this structure being investigated successfully within the next 3 years. And you arrive at a number that is, by your own standards, acceptable. There is one other factor. In the course of your preliminary research on the new client, the research you conduct through the same public and semi-public intelligence sources you have used for 5 years, you find a connection, not a direct one, a structural connection, 2 layers down, between the new client and a government, not the government of a small country with limited reach, a government with financial intelligence capabilities, with international cooperation agreements, with the specific institutional will to pursue cases that other governments decline. A government that has been building a case for 3 years, the existence of which you know because one of your existing clients mentioned it in passing as a reason they had restructured their operations in a specific way 6 months ago. You sit with this information for a long time. You are in the apartment. The surfaces are clean. The coffee has gone cold. Outside the window, the city moves in its ordinary way. People going about lives whose complexity is entirely visible, entirely legible, entirely manageable. You think about Elena's 48 hours. You think about the fee. You think about the government case that may or may not be building towards something that may or may not reach the level of the structure you would be building. You think about the rule you set for yourself 5 years ago. Not a rule about governments, a rule about boundaries, about the last line between who you are and who you will not become. You have built an exit plan. Not recently. You built it 2 years ago with the same methodical precision you apply to everything. 3 clean identities, documented and stored in separate locations. Liquid assets in 4 currencies across 6 accounts that are structurally disconnected from your working financial life. A contact in a jurisdiction that specializes in the kind of quiet disappearance that does not attract attention because it is done through entirely legal channels, a person who changes their name and their residency and their financial footprint through nothing more dramatic than paperwork, done in the right sequence, in the right places, at the right time. The question has never been whether the exit plan works. The question is when the exit plan becomes the right choice compared to continuing. You have been asking yourself this question for 2 years. You have always answered it the same way. Not yet, not yet, not yet. You look at Elena's number on the encrypted screen. You think about not yet. You are 33 years old. You have moved over $800 million in 5 years. You have never been investigated. You have never been named in anything. You are, in every official record, a modestly successful independent financial consultant with a clean compliance history and a small but respectable client base. The gap between that record and the truth is the size of a life. You pick up the phone, not to call Elena. You open the encrypted application your exit contact uses. You type 4 words, a pre-agreed signal established 2 years ago, meaning begin the sequence. You have not sent it before. Your thumb rests on the send button for a long time. Outside the window, the city continues. The money continues. Somewhere in a structure that exists across 7 jurisdictions and 42 legal entities, $300 million from this year continues to quietly settle into hotels and restaurants and property portfolios and legitimate business empires that will never be connected to the people who funded them. You have built the cleanest financial architecture in your world. You have never made an error. You have never been caught. And you are now, for the first time in 5 years, not calculating whether to continue.